Um, I gotta point out though, the soundtrack is miserable.
You don't like it, yeah?
I
I
think it's
thought I
terrible.
saw you say that on like Facebook, and like I said, I didn't comment back or anything because I wanted to save it all for here. But I thought it was interesting.
I think it's lackluster. It lacks energy. It's like a bad Philip Glass. It's repetitious. It's thin. It's almost even tinny at certain points. I mean, compared to the Halo soundtrack. Apparently, they fired the guy who did the Halo soundtrack, and they like slapped together the soundtrack really late in the game.
Really?
But I mean,
Is it
think about
Marty
the.
McDonald? Is that the guy's name?
I don't recall. Um, but think about like the epicness of the Halo soundtrack. You know that booming, deep, like hollow. Oh, you know the
Yeah,
dun 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 dun. Whereas I was sitting in some firefight listening to the soundtrack thinking that it belonged in like a David Cronenberg picture. And I was like, I don't want it anywhere near this right now. Give me
yeah.
something epic, like, ratchet it up,
Yeah.
please. Like,
That
it was driving me crazy. I almost got to the point where I turned off the music.
really?
Yeah, it was bad.
Wow. Okay, wait. Well, so because I really do I don't feel like it's like one of the best soundtracks I've ever heard or anything like that opposite of what you feel like, but here were some things I started noticing about it was there were some later missions on the Earth missions specifically, where you're watching like this giant satellite in the background unfold, or like your ghost is hacking a computer terminal and stuff like that. And they almost go with like this classic science fiction sounding kind of like woo, like something you're gonna hear over the loudspeakers at Disneyland while you're in line for Space Mountain, like that. like that kind of sci-fi. And then when you're running around the tower, there's like music that'll sometimes playing. It's like very playful and kind of like fantasy sounding, almost like very reminiscent of like the Fable 1 soundtrack. Um, and I thought it was interesting that they chose to do that because, like, in the game you're fighting like wizards and goblins and hobgoblins and different fantasy sounding characters like that. And so I thought, like, oh, interesting. Okay, so they're like combining like this very sci-fi sounding aesthetic with like a very fantasy sounding stuff, depending on kind of like where you are and what you're doing in the game. And then they also, for like some of the more intense moments in the game, and I particularly noticed this on like the moon and some of like the underbelly of the moon and some of the more gritty environments of in the game, is there's almost like this dirty electro techno sounding like music that like kind of like starts pumping through. Kind of sounds like garbage. Like, I'm not exactly sure what it's supposed to, what genre it is. It's like industrial techno or something, but I liked it. And I don't know if it's because I like all of those genres of music individually, and I could see what they were trying to do with like combining them into one experience in the game, but it admittedly was one of those soundtracks where for the past week I'd be in the shower or something like that, and I'm just like listening to the Destiny
Are you
soundtrack.
serious?
Yeah.
Uh, that was something I wanted to quickly forget.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember I was sitting there playing with my friend Tom, and we both had to stop. And we are like, this soundtrack is ruining this game.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
It actually made me want to stop playing because I was like, it's so incongruous with the action on screen that it's like a ringing phone. I want to shut it up. I want to stop playing and stop it so I can get back
Wow.
to the game.
Can you? I haven't checked in the audio options. I wonder if you can turn the music off or all the way down. I didn't check to see if you could.
I haven't checked to see if I could either, but most games let you do that.
Yeah.
Um,
So, if the soundtrack was more Halo, though, do you think that's fair to, like that?
I
We're already saying it feels very Halo. That would have just done that more so.
well, the Halo soundtrack was really good though.
Hmm.
It was a unique piece of genre epic soundtrack, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, in that it followed all of the requirements of an epic piece, an epic symphonic piece
Mm-hmm.
for a sci-fi game, right?
Yeah.
Um, but it's very memorable. It has a great progression, and it pumped me up.
Yeah.
Every time when you're getting ready to get into a fight, and or you're just coming around a corner and you'd see the massive level, and then you start to see enemies in the background, and as they get closer, suddenly you can feel it. The soundtrack suddenly kicks in, dun 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 dum.
Yeah.
And you're like, all right, here we go, and you're getting to run in, and you're almost playing along with the music, and that's a beautiful thing. Like a game like Rez, where you are actually in concert,
Mm-hmm.
playing the game with the beats of the soundtrack. In a game like Halo, you started to sort of mimic it on your own, even though there's no in-game advantage. But
Yeah.
it pumped you up for the experience.
Yeah.
Whereas the soundtrack and that's what I want out of the soundtrack. Like I want it to find its own way to match the tone of the game and to enhance the experience. Whereas the one for Destiny, I felt like was a complete distraction.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't matter to me that it's a different genre, that maybe it was more electronic, or that they were trying to replicate a different sound, but I still need it to integrate into the experience. And either I was playing Destiny very differently than other people, or I felt like it was just out of place.
Yeah. It's funny that you bring that up, because I'll say that I do agree. I will say that for as much as for as much as I enjoy the different elements that the soundtrack offers, depending on where you are and what you're doing, I think that the soundtrack as a whole is largely unforgettable.
Okay.
Or no, not unforgettable, largely forgettable. Like it's just,
okay.
they don't have their da-da-da-da, there's nothing in there that I ever hum afterwards or think that will be remembered any amount of years into the future. And you kind of got me thinking about how I was describing the one part, specifically like on the Earth missions, where I said that the soundtrack sounded very, Space Mountain-y, Disneyland-ish, maybe like we'll say like a mid to late 70s kind of like classic sci-fi, maybe even Star Trek, from that era, like vibe and whatnot. And hearing that in the game, for as much as I enjoyed it, almost does make me feel, now that I'm thinking more about it, like there are certain aspects of this game that are very lost. Almost like it's not a completely cohesive or coherent experience. Like over the course of these 6 years, it's possible that Bungie lost sight of what they were creating. And so when I think about those classic sounding elements of the soundtrack, and like how I wish the game was more Mass Effect and more Fallout, I think about, in all the elements that you were saying with like acid rain and different gravity and stuff like that on the moon, how it could have been a much more thing. And if they would have changed the art direction and nailed the soundtrack, they could have made the game kind of like Halo feels like. It's just this very tightly put together, coherent, cohesive experience, and like Destiny's a lot more jumbled by comparison.
Yeah, I think that's actually, I think that's correct. That's the vibe I was getting, that Destiny started out with all the best intentions, and after 6 years of development and $500 million, they could only put out so risky a project. And they could only do so much. It's like there's too big to fail, and then there's too big to succeed.
Yeah.
So a game like Watch Dogs has to appeal to a lot of people because it costs a lot of money to make, and they can't make too edgy of a game, so they've got to play it safe. And movies do the same thing. And I feel like anything after being in development for 6 years could very easily lose sight of its end goal and lose track of whatever vision it was trying to adhere to in the first place. I don't know what the solution is to that. Quicker development always feels like it would ruin the game, and any longer feels like it would stretch it out too far too. There might not be a solution to it. There might just have to be like, you make sure that you don't go longer than. I actually don't know. I don't develop games. Not yet.
It's unfortunate that I think a lot of games that both like EA and Activision publish because of the amount of money that they put into production and the amount of money that they're going to put into market. Where you start reaching these $500 million dollar marks and stuff like that, the products tend to be very average across the board.
Yeah. And just something else, sort of along that line. I mentioned like the level design is really wide open. And unlike, say, Borderlands or Diablo, I feel like Destiny also very much discourages exploration. I don't think I could count the number of times I went into a cave and found absolutely nothing there. Also,
same here.
The number of times I went into a cave and it was designed exactly like every other cave, that got really annoying. I would be going through a world and I'd see this little hole in the wall. I was like, oh, cool, it's over there. And I walk in and it's the exact same cave that I saw a little way back. And there's nothing in it. And there are all these crevices and all these places to go hide or to go into, and there's nothing there. Whereas like in Borderlands or in Diablo, there's equipment and gear and stuff to modify your adventure or to put into your little equipment bag all over the place.
Yeah.
And Destiny's really sparse.
It is. It suffers from, I guess the one thing I love about Destiny is the weight, and I'll say the weight of the weapons and the gear that you get in the grand scheme of the gameplay and the PvP and the endgame rating. I feel like because you can't trade weapons and you can't. Anyways, I'm going to get off track. My brain's going to start going in all these directions. What I'm saying is, like last night, for example, I finally earned my first set of purple chest armor and like my purple leggings. Other than those purples, I'm in an all blue being, like really good high level set of like weapons and additional armor and stuff like that, and I earned each and every single piece. Sometimes I got it through PvP rewards, sometimes I got it from completing strike missions, and sometimes, you open up a chest or get a drop off an enemy, and you're like, woohoo, blues, and it's like, it's awesome, and there's no other way to get that stuff in the game besides earning it for yourself. And in them balancing how important and cool it is to have good gear in that game, you're right, they've made it so that 9/10 of the caves are vacant.
Yeah.
And why there's not even other stuff in them. Like, okay, so there doesn't need to be a chest in every single cave. That's fine if that's how you wanted to balance the game out. But at least put something in there to reward me for crawling around in this little black space.
And there's not even a cool visual. It's a cut and paste exact same cave. At that point, it feels lazy.
The weird thing about that, though, right, is... therefore, when I do find a chest in a cave, especially when I'm playing with somebody else, like on the mic, I'm like, "Oh, Nick, there's a cave, there's a chest here, like get over here."
And then you know what's in it? Spin metal.
Well, no, in that same chest where I got 2 helium cells or whatever they're called the other night, he got a helium cell plus 2 blue items. One of them, when he took them back to the tower, ended up being a purple machine gun. I was just like, you lucky son of a gun. Like, so there is that. But at the same time, I don't know if...
in Diablo, you get a lot of equipment. And after a certain level, a lot of it's junk.
Yeah.
But it's still something for you to sift through. It's still giving you something to be active about. And then when you come across the special gear, that special gear is still special. But you have had something to do all along. This is actually, it's odd because in the same way Destiny discourages Destiny encourages inaction. Another way it does that, and not just by lack of equipment and lack of things for you to sort through, is the regenerating shield, which I don't have a problem with, but it was an interesting point that my friend made, which is you're not trying to manage your health so much as you're just trying to run in, hit a few things in the run back, and wait, which is inaction. And that doesn't bother me too much, but it is an interesting perspective to keep in mind, because the game does encourage you to get to a certain point, and you get close to dying, and then you've got to run and hide, and then wait it out to make sure your shield comes back up or something like that. or not something like that, but like either you wait for it to go full, or you wait for it to go about half because you have confidence that you can get through the rest of the enemies
Right.
on half a shield. And so by having a mostly empty environment and a regenerating shield, there's actually a pretty strong emphasis on not doing much other than shooting.
Yeah. Some classes play a little bit differently. I could see how you'd feel that way about the hunter, and I largely feel that way about my titan. I said, like, however, there are certain, like I said, I get that ability where if I down somebody with like a melee attack, I get like the extra speed and the shield put on me, and so it's like I know that when I run into like the thick of the firefight, if they do whittle down my shield and my health bar gets low, if I have that ability charged up and I can down them with the melee hit, I know that all of that goes away and I can start basically piggybacking abilities and the recharging of abilities on top of each other and stuff like that. But I feel like those moments are kind of few and far between, like you're saying, between how often you do end up just sitting behind cover and waiting for your stuff to recharge. I don't know what you want to talk about next, but I feel like that could segue us a little bit into something we talked about earlier, which was, like you said, the general nature of the game, which is kill clusters of enemies, get to computer console, fend off wave of enemies, repeat that throughout the entire game's story.
Yeah.
What I wanted to add on to that then, and this is also present in the end game that I'm experiencing right now, is that while there are like bosses during these like strike missions in the game and stuff like that, they are essentially just bullet sponges. So you're doing the same thing. You're not hacking a computer. You're filling an enemy full of bullets. The enemies have weak spots that still consume large amounts of bullets, and then you have the little enemies running around, which you are sort of meant to just kill to get more ammo to put those bullets into the big guy. And this never changes. When you get into like the higher level stuff in the game, the only difference is that those enemies running around that you're meant to get ammo off of become even harder and even more of a pain in the ass to kill and get ammo off of. It's a never-ending cycle, and I'm curious to see how I feel about after I've done it more and more and more. I enjoy it right now, especially with a team of friends when we're all kind of in there and communicating, and there is a certain amount of coordination that's going into taking down some of these high-level bosses and stuff like that. But at the same time, there is a part of me that's gravitating even more towards the player versus player content right now because I kind of dread just going into another bullet sponge mission,
Yeah. Yeah, I know what you mean. I think it was like the summoning pit or something like that on the moon.
Oh, with the guy in the chains?
Yeah, the guy in the chains.
Yeah, he's a pain in the butt.
Yeah, he was really tough, and all the enemies surrounding him were really tough.
Yeah.
For a while, I noticed something interesting. It was a little bit dynamic. If you stayed outside the door that first opens that lets you into that area where the guy's in chains, if you stay in there and you try and 300 them, try and funnel them into that doorway and just kill all the enemies as they come through. One, you realize that they never stop coming through. Two, they send harder and harder enemies.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so the game really discourages you from sitting there, which is nice in a way. Even though, like, one of my favorite tactics is to just funnel people down.
Yeah.
Just like, throw them into a situation where they can't escape and then riddle them with bullets.
Yeah.
But they send more and more knights after you, and they send more and more wizards after you, and the wizards start throwing spells behind you, so you can't stay in that room, which is pretty clever. It's a good idea.
So you are inevitably overwhelmed right there.
You're inevitably overwhelmed right there, and you're forced to go into the room where it is apparently a lot easier to survive if you, if you actually try and go into the room and take him out.
Yeah.
But it was that mission that kind of pushed me over the edge because we were having so much trouble killing that guy. And I played probably 20 times in a row with these two random dudes online. And we couldn't do it, and eventually they quit. And I was like, well, I'm certainly not going to be able to do it on my own.
Right.
I had to back out. And then, of course, my friend Tom sat down and played it later, and he was like, oh, yeah, we beat it. And I was like, ah. So, I mean, he's probably better at the game than me. But it was at that point that the bullet sponge enemies overwhelmed me. and the repetitive nature of the missions took hold. Um, I never feel like I'm involved with the story.
No, I
Because
completely
I don't,
agree.
because I don't ever do anything that affects the story. I barely do anything that reveals the story.
Right.
I think we talked about this very briefly at some point, but one of the reasons I prefer Dear Esther as opposed to Gone Home, and this is way off topic.
Yeah, don't
Um,
for the record though, don't ruin any Gone Homeness for me, okay?
I'm not gonna
Okay.
spoil anything.
Okay.
Um, the thing that happens with Dear Esther is that I don't actually you don't have any buttons that interact with the world, and you walk around and all you do is you hear the voiceover from two or three different storylines
Hmm.
that link together, and so essentially all you're doing in Dear Esther is uncovering a story that has already happened. Um, but there's something very compelling about the ethereal nature of it and the fact that you're walking through that same story again, and
Hmm.
that's a theme. That repetition is a theme in those stories. So you're playing, even though you're not playing the story, you are playing the consequence of the story. Whereas in Gone Home, though you can interact with things in the house, all you're doing is uncovering a story that's already happened.
Right.
Um, and that kind of bugs me because I want to interact with something instead of just. It's like it's not even a choose your own adventure book. It's like I just have to travel across the house to get to the next page of the book,
Hmm.
um, and it seems a little excessive. And although I love Gone Home, I prefer the approach by Dear Esther.
Okay.
And in a game like Destiny, all I'm doing is pushing a button to get them to tell me what the next part of the story is, and my part in that story is to just kill the same enemies over and over again.
Hmm.
It's not like I have, not that I want escort missions, but it's not like I have an escort mission. It's not like I have a mission where I have to go um, either protect a thing or uncover a particular thing. There's like nothing that I have to interact with. The missions themselves have no dynamics. Um, there every now and then there's like that public mission that you can join where you have to defend a little thing that's crashed into the ground,
Hmm.
but you do that by killing a bunch of enemies. It's not even like that thing has a health meter. You just have to survive for X number of minutes.
Yeah.
Um,
I like those world events. There's a couple of them. You ever do the one where it's like there's a big enemy that spawns and you have to like down the enemy before he goes through a certain amount of checkpoints and stuff like that?
oh no, see that sounds cool.
Yeah, he's got a big shield and he essentially he's really hard to take down and he's trying to run away from you while firing back at you.
Oh,
That one's always really hard. There's a few different versions of those that you can do besides the guarding of the territory one.